Hello guys and welcome back. My name is Melek and I'm very happy to see you all around. Thank you so much for joining us so plenty in Twitch chat and also the amazing conversations going on. Keep conversing and of course join the Discord server to keep talking to people from the same industry you love and maybe find new friends to game, to create new projects and create amazing things with. So do not miss out on that opportunity, obviously. And I mean, we already had amazing guests here in the studio. We had our lovely opening breakfast. And now it's time for our very first keynote of the day. And for that, I'd like to welcome co-founder of Vlambeer, Rami Ismail, who's with me via video chat. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Rami, how's it going? How are things going for you?
It's pretty good. I mean, I'm stuck at home, which is not really my usual. Normally, I'm traveling around the world, but through this digital media, we can still connect and still talk to each other. So that's very exciting to me.
Absolutely. I feel the absolute same way. It is a difference being stuck at home for a change, actually. But Rami, I mean, as you already said, due to the digital space, we're still very closely together. And let's talk about you and Vlambeer. First of all, what is your role?
So I used to be the co-founder of Vlambeer, which was a Dutch independent studio creating indie games. I'm also the executive director of Game Dev World and the creator of Dupresca. So I kind of do all sorts of things around the games industry, mostly focus on territories around the world, trying to figure out how I can help and how the industry can reach out to developers everywhere.
That is something very exciting, and I really can't wait to hear more about that because you prepared a keynote for us. What are you going to talk to us about?
So the basic version is I've talked to a lot of developers over the past years about what they're seeing in terms of trends, in terms of movements, in terms of where the industry is going and where we came from. And the basic version is that where we are right now, we can't stay. We have to move forward and we have to keep facing the future. And especially now, that's going to be really important. So I'm going to talk a bit about the trends that were mentioned and the things that we have to watch for.
Rami, that sounds very, very exciting. And I can't wait for you to start your keynote. So I'd say, take it away.
Thanks so much. So as we just discussed, my name is Rami Ismail. I am a game developer. I am an industry ambassador, and I'm the creator of Dupresca. I was the co-founder of Vlambeer, and I'm the executive director of Game Dev World. I've also been involved in various independent initiatives around the industry. And well, I want to talk a bit about why we can't stay here. The industry is rapidly changing, and that is great because it gives us lots of new opportunities, but it also creates a lot of risk. And more than any time before, the industry is changing in ways that require us to act or at least be aware of the shifts that are occurring. So over the past year and a bit, I've contacted a lot of developers about what the most critical changes to our industry were, what they are, and what they will be. And I do want to emphasize that we are obviously not one industry anymore. Like sometimes we like to pretend we're one industry, but the reality is we are a number of interconnected industries in this and enthusiast groups in this gaming field in the media. So with that said, let's jump straight in. The first thing that kept being mentioned over and over was live streaming. And there is nothing that has been more disruptive to games than live streaming. When I first came across it in 2013, it was explained as sort of like live YouTube with chat. But in the years since, live streaming has fundamentally changed our approach to design, our approach to marketing. And games are now being built for Twitch, even if developers are often not aware of it. We're building our games to be replayable, to have multiplayer, to have new and unique experiences every time we play, so we can share them with our audiences on Twitch.tv or any other live streaming platform. So games are being built to retain streamer audience. That is something that a lot of developers are subconsciously doing, but it is something that over the next few years will remain important and will remain something that a lot of developers I talked to said will be important. Then with that, obviously monetization has to change as well. And I think a lot of AAA and indies have learned from mobile in that to support games that keep going, that keep engaging, we need new business models. The one-time transaction is becoming harder and harder to maintain. So we're seeing this push into subscription models, into microtransactions. Every now and then we see people push it too far, and we get a gamer response, a backlash, or an industry backlash. As we're figuring things out, it's important to be aware of that shift. Right now, a lot of studios are very comfortably sitting in the, we're going to sell the game once and then make some money that way. But as the industry shifts, I think it's important to at least look at these other models and be aware of what they're doing. I'm not saying you have to use them. At Vlambeer, we always stayed premium, but that doesn't mean that we never looked across the lines just to see what was happening elsewhere. Subscription models are obviously one of the biggest new changes. We're seeing sort of a new style platform subscription service, and a lot of developers that I talked to were at least in talks with one of the major platforms, whether that's Apple Arcade, which kind of came up as an indie platform and then kind of like died again, or Game Pass, which is probably the biggest success story in games at the moment. Whatever happens, subscription models are here to stay probably. They're impossible to compete with for small developers, so they're not going away. It's an entirely new paradigm for revenue. It does create a new middleman, and it could be highly disruptive to the workflow of developers. Like, we are introducing another platform or gatekeeper, and with this new potential revenue stream, whether it's a one-time deal or sort of an ongoing payment, depending on certain factors. But subscription models are definitely something that a lot of developers mention, and I feel myself as well that we should probably be looking at as a potential opportunity and risk for our medium in the nearby future. Part of that is obviously the evolution of new platforms. We are on the brink of a new console generation. The PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series S and Series X are about to release, which is an incredibly exciting time in games. That said, they don't seem to have changed much about the industry themselves. What has changed is that platforms are taking back their role a bit of being curators rather than being open platforms. And you're seeing that with things like Apple Arcade, you're seeing it with Game Pass, you're seeing it with the Epic Game Store. These platforms are reclaiming their role as curators. We're also seeing with the Epic Game Store a bit of capable competition on the PC space, which means that Steam's position, even though it has been beneficial to a lot of developers, is finally facing some competition, which can probably only be good for most of us. Indies are still primarily moving towards new platforms. As soon as they become available, we tend to fill spaces where there isn't a lot of content yet. We saw examples of that with the Switch and with VR, saw a huge indie boom. There are never a lot of winners. I mean, on VR, it was probably like Beat Saber, Pistol Whip, Alchemy Labs, right? Like just a handful of winners. But regardless, you're still seeing that shift into new platforms. And I think we'll see very similar with these new console platforms. Boutique publishing has been really interesting and was mentioned a few times under different names: indie publishing, boutique publishing, AA publishing. The interesting thing is a lot of developers pointed out that the reason boutique publishers are an interesting proposition is because boutique publishers exist. They've effectively created their own market by being very good at what they do, and being so good at what they do that as an individual developer, as an individual indie, there's really not much you can do to compete with them. We worked with Devolver Digital, which was a lovely experience, but I will also say that there would have been no way for us to compete with Devolver Digital. And even though obviously the space is somewhat collaborative, we're still competing for the same eyeballs for the same time. That said, there is, with these new platforms and with these new streaming services and all these things that developers need to sign up for and sign contracts for and release things on, manage SKUs, there is increased overhead. And developers can really use support, whether it's the new kind of upcoming agent model or just the publisher model. Developers can absolutely use that help. Funding with boutique publishing has become more front-loaded, and we're seeing the same thing with the subscription model as well. A lot of acquisitions lately. So a lot of self-funding is kind of going away. This is a repeat of a state the industry has been in before, and I suspect that it will swing back in a few years. But for now, that is the state we're headed towards. Marketing is both less important. It's more dependent on a few major platforms, and it generally is more direct nowadays. We're seeing a lot more direct marketing. It does create a new opportunity for middlemen there, for focus, for critical mass. I mean, last summer, Jeff Keighley pretty much successfully privatized game announcements for all of summer 2020 with the Summer Game Fest. But you're seeing that same effort on a smaller scale. Wholesome Direct, Ludonarracon, small enthusiast spaces that showcase games to the audiences through small events. Thorsten Wiedemann spoke right before me. Amaze is a beautiful example of something like that as well. So we're seeing this sort of new direct marketing where people are skipping traditional press, even skipping Twitch streamers to just directly market their own work in collaboration, in coalition. And that seems to be very effective for a lot of developers and pretty cost effective as well. So Ludonarracon, which I just mentioned, but also Amaze, are great examples of events that have moved digital or partially digital. Ludonarracon was a great example. It was on Steam. It was an exhibition of 40-ish games, 50 games on sale, 20-ish playable demos, I think. It was entirely online. People could join it from everywhere in the world. I'm also an online event organizer with GameDev.world. We created an 8-language, 24-hour program that was streamed around the world. Speakers from all sorts of languages, live translated. And on our first attempt, we were already larger than normal GDC would be. So online really has a lot of potential for reach out, for events, to reach audiences that they normally wouldn't be able to reach, and to allow people around the world access to this knowledge and these spaces. I remain hopeful with this year that one of the good things that might come out of this awful COVID crisis is that a lot of events are forced online this year, and I hope that a lot of them see the opportunity that is inherent in being digital and being online, and that there will be more events for everybody in the next few years. Remote work was mentioned a lot, obviously, in this COVID year. This year forced a lot of change, a change that we thought might be, or some of us thought might be impossible until recently. I think a lot of indies have traditionally exceeded at online collaboration, but it's now also an increasing amount in AA and AAA. And here too, we see incredible opportunities. Remote hiring is obviously great. Instead of forcing people into major cities with high expenses, not just in the US and Canada, but also in Europe and Asia. Allowing people to work from a little bit further away obviously creates a lot of opportunity for marginalized developers and for talent that would otherwise be inaccessible. It does also come with some new collaboration challenges. Some developers raised that they really had to retrain their management styles to work online. A lot of things that would sound relatively benign in real life, like saying, can we talk for a moment? Sounds way less scary when it's an in-person thing and you can see each other's expression than when you just get a little message that says, can we talk in Slack? I think a lot of developers have been exploring new tools. Slack gets mentioned a lot, Discord, Trello, but also Notion, which is a relative newcomer, seems to be mentioned a lot. And a lot of tools for live collaboration, for tool sets, for file synchronization are continuously being explored. I think the industry keeps finding better ones, and that's really exciting. No, events is not the only thing that went online. Where we play our games is also going online. This year has been a major shift for cloud gaming. We now have Stadia, but there's Nvidia, PlayStation Now is still around, Amazon, Facebook just jumped in, Tencent is in it, and it's kind of an obvious evolution of a lot of the things we've talked about so far. Live streaming, live service, subscription models, all of these things come together in cloud gaming. It's a functional-ish technology. It works well in the right circumstances. So far, each of the platforms has dropped the ball in a different way. But regardless of dropping the ball, all of them seem to be doing quite well. Cloud gaming seems like a niche product, but it might have a lot of reach beyond what the industry traditionally looks at as audience. And while the numbers are somewhat wishy-washy at the moment, they're not entirely clear for each of them. It does seem like each of the platforms, or most of the platforms running cloud gaming at the moment, are happy with the direction it's going in. You have to remember that for a lot of them, it's a future-proofing investment. This is something that if you can capture a part of the market, you might be able to launch yourself into a position like Steam has at the moment. And with the technological advancements, 5G, faster internet, cloud gaming really is positioned to make a lot of money for these companies, and obviously force a lot of developers to at least consider the model while they're developing. The other thing that is exciting about everything going online outside of cloud gaming is that a lot of spaces have become virtual social platforms, even if they weren't meant to. Games are social spaces for people to exist in, and during COVID, we've seen a lot of identity forming, community forming around games that weren't necessarily meant for it. Fortnite has turned into effectively a Second Life. Second Life came back this year. I didn't really expect that news in 2020, but here we are. But Minecraft, Roblox, Animal Crossing, all these spaces have become people's primary social spaces. For me, it's Destiny. I still play that almost every weekend, and it's just my hangout with friends, catch up. And it used to be that, but now it's the defining social space I have. I think for a lot of people, games are that, and games that play into that are doing incredibly well right now. It's obviously unsure how this situation develops, but suffice to say, for the next few months, it is very likely that social games or games with social interaction will do really well. Speaking of social, community management is one thing that kept coming up. Every developer said that they focus on community management as one of the main pillars of their studio. That is a relatively new development. And I said earlier that marketing, traditional forms of marketing have become less important. But branding has become more important. People want to buy games from identities. They want to buy games from people or ideals from beings beyond just a company. And there's, for that reason alone, there's an increased awareness of community management. It's probably the main driver of sales, of brand awareness. And if I had to guess, based on all the chats I've had, it's probably the most critical factor to success. That does mean there's higher competition there, right? People are hiring dedicated community managers if they didn't already have them. And the community managers that are there are getting better at finding tones, finding structures, processes that help them connect with their community. Mike Rose, Rave of Ravendale on Twitter, is a great example of how you do community management on Discord. There are good examples lots of good examples, honestly, of people doing incredible community work on Twitter. But emerging well, you can't really call TikTok emergent. But platforms like TikTok have developers doing incredible work there as well. Victoria Tran does incredible work on TikTok. With that, though, with being a personality, with being an identity or an ideal, obviously comes higher accountability. So this community management is a two-sided sword. You can't just do community management. It has to communicate values, and if you have those values, you have to live by them. Which brings us to social responsibility. I think there is an increased awareness of the social responsibility and influence that we have as games, the effect we have on the minds of people, the effects we don't have on the minds of people. I'm not trying to have the conversation about whether games make violent, because I think we're all sick and tired of long disproven ideas about how games affect people. But there are absolutely things that games do that we have to carefully look at and keep looking at, for a variety of reasons. But before I circle back to that, just a few days ago, we had a great example of games as political media, whether we wanted it or not, when Among Us was being used in the US elections to convince people to vote by two representatives that just went on Twitch and streamed Among Us. And even when it's intentional, even in large AAA games, there seems to be an increased effort to do the right thing. I mean, 2 of the 3 most recent Call of Duty games that I played featured an Arab protagonist. Well, if you follow my talks, if you follow my Twitter, you know I'm half Arab, and you know that the lack of Arab representation is something that I rail against in the games industry. I've not really had to yell at a Call of Duty game particularly hard lately, because they seem to be taking that social responsibility. But like I said, games have an influence on people, and games do have effects on people. And that's something we have to be careful with, especially in terms of how we exploit psychology to create player loops or retention loops or spending. Is something that the industry has sort of used as, oh, look at what we can do, and never really thought about look at whether we should do it, which has brought us into some hot water with regulations. Some of the developers I talked to mentioned that they could really feel that the games industry is shifting from being sort of a forgotten child of media, where we just kind of do our own thing and things will hopefully be okay, to getting a lot of increased scrutiny from governments, regulatory bodies. You see it with microtransactions in the European Union, where the discussion around gotcha games and gambling has really turned into a political discussion now. Some of the developers I talked to are obviously worried about that regulation, because regulation is usually local, which means that per territory we might have different rules to deal with. So there might be a need for the games industry to self-regulate in that regard. If we don't, we'll just get regulated, which is fine by me, as long as the problem gets solved of exploiting people or creating games that might be, not great for the players. But obviously, I too would prefer if we just self-regulate that. When it comes to things that are not great, the biggest issue that faces our industry still is the way a lot of developers are treated by management. This is not an issue that's going away. I know that the majority of people that I'm talking to right now are probably in the management layer or somewhat higher up in the company that they're working with. I can reassure you that this isn't going away, and I hope that you're all on board with that, because how we treat our developers, how we treat the people that work for us, is incredibly important. And we're seeing a lot of interesting initiatives. Unionization has had varying efficiency around the world. Obviously, it's super hardly needed in the primary industry locations in the US, in Canada, and a lot of efforts have been sort of scattershot. But there is a very real effect on upcoming talent. If you talk to students now, if you talk to developers around the world, awareness of crunch, awareness of the way they're treated is incredibly high. And this is something that upcoming talent will be looking at. It's a good movement, and we're also seeing good developments in the direction of co-ops and just increased public discussion of what the games industry should be like and how we should treat our people. That is a result of partially of democratization. The industry continues to democratize or designerize. It is easier and easier for people to just make something, which mostly stems from an increased focus on the ability to create with limited technological knowledge, which means that we get more quality output from people that are traditionally industry averse, might not be into games, or might be outside of our industry. And with that increased variety, with that increased diversity of creators, we get an increased diversity of games and an increased diversity of target players and markets. What is exciting to me personally is that we're seeing more specialized events, more specialized sectors in our industry, or in our field, I should say, because not all of them are industry, not all of them make products. But it is very exciting to see this increased democratization. Finally, one thing that was new over the past few months was this very strong awareness that we are de-globalizing. The world is in a phase of regionalization instead of globalization. And even though the global lines somewhat remain, we're seeing that the internet itself is fracturing into parts. The US is creating its own sort of space. China is creating its own sort of space. The European Union has sort of created its own GDPR region. This is probably something that will continue as countries and superpowers grapple with the power of the internet and the power of the technology that is on it. That does mean that as an industry, we are probably facing reduced or limited access to global markets. And that is a risk. On the flip side, on the positive side, it does mean that we get more defined regionalized markets, and with that, more defined cultural products. So a lot of the points I've mentioned sort of have their upside, have their downside. I tried to explain most of those as we went. But moving forward, the industry is changing in a lot of ways. And I think we're all used to that, right? Like, gaming is nothing if not resilient, if not adaptive. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you or I will be fine. In the next few years, games will have to reckon with a lot of the changes that I mentioned. I think the main issues facing many of us going forward will be that regionalization, the subscription models, and cloud gaming, right? That said, unless your business already kind of accounts for all of these or some of these, or even affects all of these, we can't stay here where we are now. Where we are now is a transitional period. Indie, as we know it, is gone. There's now AA or experimental games, art games, non-commercial work, so much more. The models that used to drive those, the people that used to drive those, have to move on into new places. Traditional business models are under tremendous pressure. And that shift offers opportunities now with a lot of people buying games for subscription platforms. But obviously, as those platforms grow, they might stop doing that. So there is absolutely a potential for negative repercussions later. Design will likely shift further towards games as a service, free-to-play, subscription models, just because of the financial reality of things. Even if we don't want to, we're still going to build our games in the way that most people engage with it. Even if you're just an enthusiast creator, the financial reality of our medium affects how we think of what is good design. And I think the social and labor responsibility requirements and expectations will continue to increase around the industry. This is something that you have to act on. You can't just let that be and figure out how that works. Your company needs to be taking proactive steps towards making sure that you treat people well and that they have a healthy work-life balance. So even though these are not challenging times for the industry at large, for each individual developer, for each individual company or creator, there are challenges that require us to move forward with intent and with care. And we can't really stay as we were a year ago, or even as we are now. But as always, I think there are plenty of amazing things just ahead. Thank you.
Rami, thank you so much for this very, very interesting insight. And Rami, we sure have questions waiting for you in the wings from Twitch chat, but I would kindly ask you to also join our Discord server so we can have the Q&A session over there at discord.gg/gamesweekberlin. Thank you so much for this very interesting keynote. Any last shout outs?
No, if you want to hear more of that, you can follow me on Twitter, @tha_Rami. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and best of luck to your future endeavors. And I hope to see you again sometime soon. Thank you for being here.
Hopefully. Thank you.